Pleased to be joined now by the one, the only, the legendary, the incomparable, the well-educated, of course, going to the premier university, not just in the state of Texas, but across the world, Texas A&M University. Of course, the one, the only, Charean Williams. Charean, thank you so much for taking the time to join us at Blogging the Boys.
RJ, thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me on.
So Charean, just before we started recording, I promised you that we had a graphic ready for you. This is a really lengthy discussion that we're going to have today, a meaty discussion, I should say. And we wanted everyone to know who was going to be joining us because we're going to talk about the greatest Dallas Cowboys team of all time. And truly speaking, there is nobody more qualified than Charean to have this discussion with. Charean has obviously covered the NFL at extensive length. See, Charean, we pulled out all the bells and whistles for you. Obviously from Pro Football Talk, but Charean has covered the NFL to the greatest degree for a long time now. And one of the truly great people, the Keepers of the Flame, Hall of Fame voters, and a winner of the Dick McCann Award, the highest honor I would argue that anyone can achieve. Charean, do you feel loved and taken care of here? Because that was the goal.
Gosh, yes. Thank you for that, RJ. That was awesome.
So again, we're well equipped here ourselves to discuss who the greatest Dallas Cowboys team of all time is. You've had this discussion several times throughout many different points of your career. When I asked you to have this discussion, who was the first team that came to mind when you said, we're going to have a talk, like RJ's going to say a bunch of silly things, but ultimately I'm going to come down on one particular unit?
Well, RJ, I think the first argument you have to make, and the sad thing is, let's start at the beginning, is this generation of Cowboys fans, this new generation of Cowboys fans who have had it handed down to them, right, through grandpas and grandmas and moms and dads and sisters and it's just been handed down through the years, have not experienced a lot of winning with these Dallas Cowboys. We know how long it's been. A lot of them weren't born in 1995, the last time the Cowboys won a championship, which obviously was their fifth. But I think for those of us who grew up in the 1970s, you remember all those teams. And I think the first thing you have to do is you have to separate the 70s teams from the 90s teams because it was two such great eras for the Dallas Cowboys. And, it's two different eras of football, two different kinds of teams. So all that plays into it. But, I just did a quick thing on the Hall of Famers from the 1970s era and the 1990s era. And again, that I don't know that that's really a fair comparison, because what happens over time is you start to look at some of those players differently and you start to put them in the Hall of Fame as seniors candidates. So we've seen Gil Brandt, Cliff Harris, Drew Pearson go in recent years from those 1970s teams. And I think we might have that happen with these 1990s teams. I think we might see more guys go into the Hall of Fame as we go on, say a Darren Woodson for sure. It may be a while for him, but I think we can start looking at him maybe as a Cliff Harris from the 1970s as a comparison. But you look at it, the 1970s team obviously has Gil Brandt, Tom Leonard, Tex Schramm. The triumphant there is in the Hall of Fame. And then they have 9 players who are in the Hall of Fame with the 2 guys going in the class of 2020, class of 2021 this summer. And then you look at the 1990s team, and you have Jimmy and Jerry obviously are in the Hall of Fame, and then you have 6 players. And to me, that's not enough players for what those 1990s teams did. So it's hard to pick just like one team, and say that's the team. But if I'm going to pick one team out of all those teams, it's got to be one of the championship teams, right? I really and truly think the 1994 team might have been the Dallas Cowboys' greatest team of all time. When you look at their rankings on offense and defense and what they did and how good they were, that might have been the greatest team of all time. Likewise, in the 70s, it may have been that team, the 78 team that lost to the Steelers in the Super Bowl. That was a great team too. But when you start to talk about the greatest teams, they have to have gotten it done. When we talk about the Patriots, the 2007 team may have been their greatest of all time. They went undefeated in the regular season, but they couldn't get it done in the postseason. So I'd look probably at the 1992 team. If I had to pick one, if you put a gun to my head and say pick one, it would probably be that 1992 team. And that was a long-winded way to get to the 1992 team. And it's a long way to say I think the Cowboys had truly had And for those of us who have gotten to appreciate all of those great teams, some truly of the best teams in NFL history. It's just been a long time.
I think that's all extremely well said. And I think the thing you led with, the longevity as far as Hall of Famers, because you're right, like the more the time goes on, the more you mentioned obviously the ones as of late, but even Rayfield Wright went in 2006. So, I mean, that was still a really long time, obviously after the 70s Cowboys had kind of done their thing. On a different note, people love to talk about like greatest numbers in Cowboys history. 70 is going to have two stout Hall of Famers someday when Zach Martin goes in. But we'll have you on for that discussion way down the road. So last year, actually, kind of when the pandemic first started, we did a podcast, you and I, on the Blog of the Boys Network about greatest teams in Cowboys history that didn't win it. We settled on the 94 squad, obviously, just because you're right. Like that did kind of feel like them at the peak of their powers, just with these own like self-inflicted wounds that they were just unable to overcome. We did settle on a particular number of teams to discuss here today. We've obviously got all the championship teams, 71, 77, 92, 3, and 5. We did include 1978, as you mentioned. I would make an argument, again, a different discussion, but that Super Bowl 13 might have been the greatest collection of talent ever on a single football field at any point in time. The 94 team, as mentioned, and then you mentioned the 2007 Patriots, but of course, the 2007 Cowboys, one of the greatest offenses in team history. I think it feels right to maybe go in chronological order. The 1971 Cowboys, Charean, something that I always look at, a mutual friend of ours, Bobby Belt, and I once had a discussion, and he told me that he specifically looks at point differential. That's kind of his hallmark trait at evaluating. Yeah. And so the 1971 Dallas Cowboys obviously won Super Bowl VI, one of the few teams in NFL history to return to the Super Bowl after losing it, and obviously specifically win it. Win 11-3, obviously a 14-game season back then, a point differential of plus 184, and this gets forgotten, but we're the last team to beat the 1972 Miami Dolphins, although they beat them in very early 1972. But still, is there a case to be made for them? Or are they just a really great team that we hold it near and dear to our hearts, but not as great as the others?
No, I completely agree with you. And I, too, look at that point differential, and the 184 really stands out when you start looking at that team. You know, they were first in yards in the NFL, first in points in the NFL. Again, it was a different era. You know, I get that. It wasn't as much passing as we see now, a lot more running. But still, they were a truly great offense for that era. Defensively, they were 7th in points and 3rd in yards. They won their last 10 games. That includes the postseason, and really got it done in great fashion. They ended up with 3 offensive Pro Bowlers and 5 on defense. So I think it was a really, really great team, one of the greatest teams probably of that decade. And it was early in the decade. And just the fact that they were able to beat the Dolphins 24-3 in the Super Bowl wasn't, of course, it was a long time before we had a close Super Bowl, but they really got it done throughout the postseason and throughout the season, frankly. Like I said, they won the last 10 games. So, yeah, there certainly is a case to be made that the 71 team was the greatest team in team history. And, again, it's hard to compare those teams, but I think when you start looking at the 70s team, that one ranks right up there. The 1971 team ranks right up there as one of the greatest of all time in Cowboys history.
Do you think it inhibits this particular team in this discussion that we're having, that it was the Craig Morton, Roger Staubach awkward situation? Like, does that hold them back from, like, if you didn't get, not to, mitigate what Roger Staubach did in 1971, but if you didn't have a complete season's worth of elite quarterback play, it is kind of difficult to put them above in like this case, 1977 as an example.
Well, that's probably on Tom Landry, and it's hard to criticize Tom Landry for what he did. But yeah, it was kind of weird the way that season started out. And it's probably the reason they lost those 3 early games. And once they settled on Roger Staubach as their quarterback, they were the best team in the NFL. And they truly dominated the league in those last 10 games. So I don't think you can hold that against them. And I'm sure Landry, when he finished his career and looked back on that team, probably wishes he had gone with Roger right away because they may have been an undefeated team. They may have not lost any games that season as dominant as they were those last 10 games.
That's fair. I also feel like when you talk about 1971, like especially like in conversations like this, Dwayne Thomas doesn't get enough love. Yeah. Kind of the OG Marshawn Lynch, like in terms of like approach to, you know, the sport and approach to wanting to do things his own way. But like to that point, I guess, you know, I don't think either one of us thinks that 1971 is the true winner here. But so fast forwarding to 1977, you get Tony Dorsett. It's difficult in my mind to play 71 over 77. This obviously you have the sustained season from Roger Staubach. You mentioned the 70s as kind of this own obviously era. There's a really strong argument to be made. I think that this is the greatest era in pro football history. Like there's like 5 different dynasties you could argue that existed in this time frame. And so this is maybe not, certainly not the best dynasty of them all, but the peak of the Cowboys dynasty within the 70s. This is when I tweeted this out that you were going to be on, a lot of people said 1977 was the answer here.
Yeah, I probably would pick the 77 team over the 71 team. They played more games. They went 12-2. They beat every team in the postseason by at least 17 points. And to me, we talk about point differential. I think that's significant that they were able to do that. I mean, they just were a really good, solid, all-around football team. They beat Chicago, Minnesota in blowouts, and then obviously beat the Broncos 27-10 in Super Bowl 12. They were second in points and first in yards on offense. Defensively, they were 8th in points and first in yards. So they were a well-rounded football team. They had 8 Pro Bowlers on that team. And the Pro Bowl, let's remember back in the 70s, it wasn't like the Pro Bowl now where we have 100-plus Pro Bowlers because the Super Bowl teams, they don't go to the Pro Bowl. Guys pull out for injuries. That's not the way it was back then. If you were a Pro Bowler, you were really held in high regard. You had a great season, and the Cowboys had 8 of those. So that's nearly half of their team were Pro Bowlers. And I just think it was a truly great team. Probably I would rank it. I might even rank it second above the 1993 team. It's right there. I mean, they were just really, really good and really dominant that season.
For me, this has nothing to do with the quality of the team. But I mean, everybody loves the Super Bowl, but I love like Super Bowls that are like rich and deep in pageantry. And this Super Bowl ages so well with the fact that it's in the Superdome. You've got the Dupree catch. I mean, like there are these really iconic moments from this game, and that doesn't exist in 1971. Plus, this is, I mean, it's New Orleans. Like, forget the Superdome part of it. Like, I know Tulane Stadium had its fair share of Super Bowls and stuff, but like that is a Super Bowl feel to me. And so, like, in a nostalgic way, this kind of is up there. And like, it just, I don't know. But it's fair to say like that it might not be the best overall Cowboys team. But so you're saying this might be second on your overall composite list.
Yeah, I have a hard time picking between 77 and 93, but they're right there together. And maybe if one of them is 2A, the other one is 2B. And I think they're both just right there together. I think the 77 team stacks up against the 93 team in its own way. Again, we're different decades here, but I think they're pretty similar teams.
Interesting. So the first losing team or Super Bowl losing team or non-championship team that we have here, we didn't include 68, but again, the game was so different. Like we're obviously going really far, not really far, but far enough back to where things are certainly different than they are in today's day and age in the NFL. But so 1978, a decade later, I mentioned Super Bowl 13, perhaps the greatest game of all time, although maybe Super Bowl 51 beats that just because of the comeback and overtime and everything. The Cowboys obviously in 1970 had a point differential of plus 176, went 12-4. At this point, there are already 16 games, way before Charean, the NFL added a 17th game and ruined the perfect symmetry of records. But this is a painful year for a lot of Cowboys fans to look back on, obviously. I mean, this one's tough, but if they had won it, I mean, is it possible that this team would have been number one overall?
Yes. Oh, no doubt. And they lost to one of the greatest teams in NFL history.
Right.
There's no question about that. And it was close. It could have gone either way. I mean, we all remember, those of us who watched the game, the Jackie Smith drop in the end zone, and Vern Lundquist saying, Jackie Smith, oh my goodness, he must be the sickest man, and he's the sickest man in America right now, because he was, getting his chance of playing a Super Bowl. and drops the pass that might have given the Cowboys the edge in that one. They had 9 Pro Bowlers that season. And again, Pro Bowls meant a lot. And they were first in points, second in yards on offense, and defense. They were third in points and second in yards. So again, a well-rounded team. It possibly could have been better, I think, than the 77 team. I really do. I think it probably was a better team, but they didn't get it done. So you have to rank the 77 team better than the 78 team. But 78 team to me is still one of the greatest Cowboys teams of all time. And I don't think a 35-31 loss to the Steelers in the Super Bowl should diminish what this team accomplished, because it was a very good, very, very good team.
I know this is a tangential question that I didn't prepare you for, but off the top of your head, if we power ranked Super Bowl losers, 2007 Patriots are number 1, 1978 Cowboys are arguably number 2, maybe?
Yeah, you know what? I think you probably have to make that case. Yeah, that they certainly would be in the discussion to be the runner-up to the Patriots as the best team not to get it done. And there are a few of those. I know the Vikings would probably argue that they had one, and the Bills would probably argue they had one. But, you know, I just think this was such a good team. And the fact that the team they lost to, it wasn't an also-ran team. I mean, this was
right.
one of the greatest teams in NFL history that they lost to. So, yeah, I definitely think they are in that discussion. And I would probably put them second among Super Bowl losers as the greatest team not to get it done.
Well, if you said that they're second, then that's what truly matters. Your opinion trumps all, Charean. Okay, let's fast forward to the 90s. You have spoken very highly of 1992. Obviously, maybe the most beloved season in Cowboys franchise history, certainly among today's generation. As you mentioned, 13-3, a plus 166 point differential, Super Bowl champions in dominating fashion. Again, this fits the pageantry thing for me. I mean, if you win the Super Bowl at the Rose Bowl, I mean, it's difficult to have a more, iconic scene. And I also think if your franchise quarterback, who is the number 1 overall pick, is the game's MVP, that just is like a further cementing of your plan, of you know what I mean, like of your disposition, of everything that you put forward in terms of getting there. And so like this fits all of that criteria. And to your point, beats maybe another all-time Super Bowl loser, although in that game, not necessarily with Jim Kelly getting hurt. But the 1992 Cowboys, make your case.
Well, I think when you've had a streak there where you haven't won, like the Cowboys are in right now, and then you turn into a winning team, it's that first team. So we talked about the 71 team. It was like that, the first championship in franchise history. That was special. And then I think when you consider what they did in 1989 to go 1-15 and, to have changed coaches, and then the Herschel Walker trade and everything they went through, all that build. I mean, for so long, they were so bad for so many years. And there's that buildup of when are they going to be good again? And so I think you remember the 92 team better than the 93 team, because in 93, there were expectations, right? They had to repeat. At that point, they were the best team in the NFL. They had to repeat. If they didn't, it would have been a disappointment. There was no disappointment in 1992. There were not those expectations of going out and winning a Super Bowl. And they did that. So I think you remember that team very fondly. And just frankly, the way they did it, and the way they did it in the Super Bowl, 52-17, and we all know that it should have been even more than that, but 52-17 over the Bills, who again were a really good football team. I mean, they had this consistency and kept getting to the Super Bowl and falling short, but this was a really good football team that they beat. And, they did it in dominating fashion, 34-10 over Philadelphia in the divisional round, and then 30-20 on the road in San Francisco against the 49ers in the championship game. They were second in points and fourth in yards on offense, and fifth in points and first in yards on defense. And that's what I think, RJ, is that in the 1990s, I think the defense does not get enough credit for what they were able to accomplish. Twice they were number 1 in yards in the NFL defensively. They were never number 1 offensively in the 1990s. They were not. They despite the fact that they had Michael Irvin, Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and all those other players that we know, and one of the greatest lines assembled offensive lines in NFL history, they never finished number one in total yards. They did on defense. And I think they were very underrated for what they were able to accomplish on defense with Charles Haley now in the Hall of Fame. Of course, Dion came on late, the 95 team, to help them win that. But I think they need more Hall of Famers off that defense for what they were able to accomplish. And that's why we go back to Darren Woodson. I think he needs to get some credit for what those 90s teams were able to do back then, because they were just dominant on defense. And I realized that, hey, the offense certainly helps that. The fact that they were able to run the ball, keep it away from the other team. I get all that. But still, you have to be really good to finish number one in total yards in the NFL defensively and do it twice.
Yeah, one of my favorite NFL film sound bites is from the I love the series America's Game that they did chronicling every Super Bowl team. And on the 92 team, when Ken Norton Jr., when they get to the point of the film, when the playoffs start, and he talks about how they were the number one defense, he says number one defense in the land and how they didn't get any respect. And so you're right. Like that makes this team, I think, kind of stand above the rest in a lot of ways, certainly. And I think, this team also like checks like some Hollywood check marks. And they obviously literally go to Hollywood, but I mean, they beat, classic division rival in the divisional round. They go on the road to San Francisco and kind of exercise the demons of the past decade and winning a candlestick. And then they beat the like preeminent AFC powerhouse at the time, obviously in the Buffalo Bills. Exactly. And so, I mean, there is, and, speaking of Ken Norton Jr., I mean, that's another name. Obviously Woody deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, but Ken Norton Jr. is like, you talk about moments or players or like underrated things. His tackle early in that game in Super Bowl 27 at the goal line is one of the greatest tackles in NFL history. I mean, it's really wild. And so it's weird how that team is kind of slept on. I mean, I don't know how that happens, but you know what I mean? I think because it was the beginning of it all that people kind of now overlook what was the beginning because the ride was so long, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. It does. And that was the first one. And they shouldn't be overlooked for how dominant they were in the postseason. And I think that goes back to, RJ, to the talk about the defense, how good that defense was. They had Philadelphia to 10 points. San Francisco, hey, we know how good that offense was, right? They held them to 20 points. Buffalo, we know how awesome that offense was. Look how many Pro Bowlers they have off that offense. Held them to 17 points in that game. So this was a dominant defense. This was a very good team. They had 6 offensive Pro Bowlers to go with all those defenders. They were very, very good. And I think when you talk about some of the greatest teams, not only in team history, but in league history, I think they're in that conversation. They're not number one and maybe not number 2, but you've got to think of them up there, at least in the top 10.
Totally. And I mean, they wiped out Hall of Famers on their path. I mean, that's how often does a team wipe out like not just Hall of Famers, but iconic Hall of Famers on the path to winning a Super Bowl? It really is amazing. The only thing I was going to add here before we moved on, you mentioned the drought that the Cowboys are obviously in at this time. It had been 15 years, obviously, since Super Bowl 12 in 1977. And if you think about it, if the Cowboys don't win the Super Bowl this year, this video, for anyone watching later, Charean and I are talking in May of 2021. If they don't win the Super Bowl this year, their drought from this particular season will be twice as long. Will have been 30 years. So it's crazy to consider that was this like, insane drought. Like, how can you go 15 years without winning a Super Bowl when the Cowboys are almost doubling that here in a handful of years? But hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully the 2021 team ends that. But we move on, Charean, to 1993. Point differential of 147. First team in NFL history to start off a season 0-2. Shout out, of course, to Emmitt Smith, and then go on to win the Super Bowl. In my mind, that actually weakens their argument as in terms of being the greatest Cowboys team of all time. Maybe the most resilient one. But if you start off a season 0-2, I don't know that you can qualify as the best.
Yeah, that's the problem, because we don't know what they would have done if they had settled with Emmitt and he had taken the contract that Jerry offered, or Jerry had offered more money, or whatever had happened, and Emmitt had been there in those first 2 games. I mean, again, you talk about this could have been possibly a 16-0 or 15-1 team, but we'll never know that, right? And never got to experience that, just like what if Jimmy had stayed in 94? Would they have won that one and been a 3-time or 4-time champion, which a lot of people think they could have been, including me. But we'll never know that. But this was still a really good team to finish 13-1 after those first 2 games. And obviously they dominated. I'm sorry, they didn't finish 13-1. They finished because they lost 4 games, so they would have gone whatever they only lost 2 games the rest of the way.
Right.
I was looking at the 92 team, but this was still a really solid game. Second in points on offense, 4th in yards. Defensively, second in points, 10th in yards. And in the playoffs, they beat Green Bay by 10, 27-17. They beat San Francisco 38-21. 8 offensive Pro Bowlers, 3 defensive Pro Bowlers. And you know how it works, RJ, like after they win the Super Bowl, they have more Pro Bowlers, and it's just natural because you see, okay, this is a really good group of players. That first year, they only had 6 Pro Bowlers. You can come back and you have 12 Pro Bowlers or 11 Pro Bowlers the next season. So they've added to that because they won the Super Bowl in 92. But again, a very, very good team. I would have liked to have seen what they could have done if they could have gone undefeated or finish 14-2, maybe, who knows, 15. Then maybe at that point they're undefeated and they can have a chance to go 16-0. If Emmett was there the whole time, maybe things change, but we'll never know that. It's still a very good record at 12-4, and you're never going to take away that Lombardi trophy that they won over the Bills. It was still in dominating fashion, 30-13, but it wasn't quite like the 52-17 game that the Cowboys just wrecked the Bills. This one was a little bit closer, but still, we'll say even today, I don't think Bills fans like facing the Cowboys. Perhaps Buffalo, considering what the Stars did, perhaps Buffalo doesn't like playing Dallas in anything right now.
That's well said. Yeah, I mean, to all that point, to the Buffalo point, Buffalo humbled this Cowboys team early on in the season. And granted, right. But still, so like if you have like a just humbling loss, I know the 92 Cowboys lost in Washington late in the season. That was a kind of touchy thing. But if you just get wrecked, it's difficult to hoist you up as the greatest team in franchise history. And it was a factor and certainly a part of their resiliency, but Troy's injuries down the stretch also kind of, like, no pun intended, hurt this team for me, because when I envision like the argument of who's the greatest team of all time, I envision them squaring off. And so, I really can't imagine the 93 team, again, an incredible job, an incredible coaching job by Jimmy Johnson to power through all that and still win it all and certainly defend a title, which is that, like you mentioned, the Pro Bowl aspect, and that's a real thing to your point. But it is a second straight title is a teeny bit more impressive in that it's a hard thing to defend. But still, all that being said, I have a difficult time saying that the 93 Cowboys, at the very least, outrank 92, which removes them from discussion as greatest of all time. We've talked about it a lot, and we talked about it last year, as mentioned, Charean, 1994. It's painful. The Cowboys obviously finished 12-4, lost. This is the only team that we're talking about that lost the NFC Championship game. We have another losing team that we'll get to in a bit, but didn't make it that far. Obviously spotted San Francisco at 21-0 lead. We all know the story. But maybe on paper, their greatest squad ever. It's just unfortunate what happened. The Jimmy factor, the Barry factor, whatever you want to call it, obviously a big deal. But do you think this is, if they beat San Francisco, I mean, they clearly would have beaten San Diego. Are they the greatest Cowboys team, especially because at that point they would have won 3 in a row? It would be impossible not to pick them.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. This was a team that dominated Green Bay 35-9 in the divisional round, and you felt like they were going to beat San Francisco in the championship game. And perhaps that the officiating had been a little better on some of those interference calls against Michael Irvin, Dion on Michael, the Cowboys probably would have won this game. They got behind early and just could never catch up. But they were second in points, 8th in yards that year, not quite as good on offense. Perhaps that had to do with the Switzer factor. I don't know. Defensively, they were as good as ever. They were first in yards and third in points. 8 offensive Pro Bowlers, 3 defensive Pro Bowlers. Again, just a really solid team. And I do think if they had won a third consecutive championship, that we are talking about them as not only the greatest dynasty of all time, this would be the greatest Cowboys team of all time, the 94 team, because I think they had the potential to be the greatest team. I mean, they played like it during the season, despite perhaps less coaching than what they were used to the previous two seasons. Let's be honest about that. And I just think if Jimmy had been there, they would have beaten the 49ers.
Unfortunately, well said. And really, there are a lot of butterfly effect moments in NFL history, certainly. This is a really massive butterfly effect because, I don't want to say he's not, but is Steve Young is lock of a Hall of Famer, if not for, Jimmy Johnson's departure, right? Like that changes, and that changes George Seifert's, aura or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that changes so much forever. That changes Ken Norton's legacy. Becoming the first player to win 3 in a row. Like that changes so many people's lives. One ill-fated decision that happened, within the Cowboys organization. And that's like, in that sense, it almost carries enough hypothetical weight to say that had they won, they certainly would be the greatest in Cowboys history.
Yeah, and to your point, I did a thing on the catch of what if, and I talked to Dwight Clark. I didn't get Montana, but I talked to Dwight Clark and a bunch of the 49ers, and I talked to Drew Pearson and a bunch of those guys who played in that game, and it's amazing that one play can change so many things, and I think it's the same with this team that we're talking about. That. If the Cowboys had been able to pull that off, just so many things would have changed. And I think you're right. That you start to think about, would Steve Young have ever won one? Would he be in the Hall of Fame if he hadn't? What happens to the Cowboys if Jimmy stays? Would they have still this long drought that they're on, having not won one since 95? There's just so many questions you have about what would have happened if the Cowboys were able to pull that off. Because you're right, they would have beaten the Chargers. And I was at the AFC Championship game that year when the Chargers upset the Steelers, which was pretty amazing in itself that they were able to do that. But the Cowboys easily would have beaten the Chargers, and we would be talking about 90, and then 95. Maybe they don't win that one if they're coming off of 3 in a row. But they would have had their 3, and 3 out of 4 is really good. 3 in a row, it just seems a little more special, I think, and would have been a little more special for the Cowboys and the fans.
Totally. And to have gotten it done in Miami, a city or a state rather that's haunted them, certainly in Super Bowl lore. Michael Irvin, that's another thing he's talked about before that's really great, that he was, Troy got his MVP in California, Emmett got his in Georgia, and Michael was supposed to get it in Miami. That would have been really cool. And I think that, again, we'll move on, but it's arguable, I think, that the 49ers are not viewed as this like classic franchise if they don't, ultimately go on to win that game, because at that point their drought is significantly longer, and all these players from the 90s, it's not just Steve Young, are viewed so differently. And so, you're talking at that point, it's just forever until the Patriots arrive, it's the Cowboys and the Steelers. And so that's a really fascinating way to look at it. But speaking of the Cowboys and the Steelers, Super Bowl 30, the Dallas Cowboys, of course, had their way in 1995, the kind of revenge tour, if you want to call it that. This was Emmett's best regular season in terms of yardage and touchdowns. And so in that sense, I think you could argue this is maybe not the best player of the era, but certainly one of the most focal point players operating at the peak of his powers. You've got Deion Sanders on this team, as you mentioned. So it's difficult from a roster talent perspective to not say that this is at the very least in the running for the greatest Cowboys team of all time.
Yeah, I like this team. I would still rank it below 92 and 93, and put it right there with 94. The fact that they got it done, you rank it ahead of the 94 team. They did score more points. They had their point differential was a plus 144 compared to a plus 166 the year before, but they were dominant in the postseason. They beat Philadelphia 30-11. They beat Green Bay 38-27. And then beat the Steelers 27-17. We know as Larry Brown became the star of that team. And as you said, it was Emmett's perhaps greatest year ever, MVP award. And he really carried them. 3rd in points, 5th in yards offensively, defensively 3rd in points, and 9th in yards. Not quite as good, I don't think, on defense as they had been in some of those other years, which is probably why I would rank it below those teams. But to their credit, they came out and they got it done after losing the heartbreak of 1994, losing to the 49ers. They came out and got it done one more time in 95. So I think you do give Barry Switzer plenty of credit for that, for his ability to get them back to the Super Bowl and to win it with Jimmy's team that he had built. So a really good team. You rank it up there in the top 5, obviously, because they've won 5 championships in their history. I may even have that one 4th or 5th on my list, but still, a really good team. I mean, they won the Super Bowl and did it in great fashion in the postseason.
No, you're right, though. It was a Super Bowl, so it's not, nobody's poo-pooing it, but it just has a different, it had a more expected feel.
Yes.
And when the expectations are different, it's hard to be like as notably great. My favorite thing about this team isn't even the Super Bowl. I mentioned Rayfield Wright in his Hall of Fame class in 2006. It's that half of the 2006 class was in the NFC Championship game. Obviously you had Troy Aikman and Reggie White and then John Madden on the call. I mean, so that, and I believe that it was the highest attended game in Texas Stadium's history too. So like a lot of just historical nostalgia surrounds it, but it really is not, I'm fine with you. If you want to put it like 4th or 5th, I won't lose any sleep over it, Charean. Just because again, I do think also at that point, like the public perception of the Cowboys was so different that it does change the way you view them, if that makes sense.
Well, and it just had that feel of the Cowboys being on their last legs. I mean, you felt like that was probably going to be their last championship, for a while. And as it turned out, it certainly was. He stayed in, he stayed around a couple more years and they went 10-6 and lost the division, and then 6-10, and then he was gone on his way and Shane Gailey comes in. But that just had the feel of that team being close to being done. Like, it was the thread was starting to come out a little bit, and you're starting to pick it, and you're starting to see some openings on that team after Jimmy left, and they just weren't. And of course, free agency came in too. We didn't even talk about that, but free agency now has come in, and so that team is starting to lose players off of it, with players going free agency going elsewhere. And the Cowboys were picked clean in some way. So that just felt like they were sort of on their last legs. And as it turns out, they certainly were on their last legs that season. But, as a Cowboys fan, it was great to see them win one more and do something that hadn't been done in winning 3 of the 4 Super Bowls. So that part was good. But it just had that feel, RJ, that they were close to being done, and they were.
No, I agree. That's well said. And you're right. Free agency playing an important role, but to that point, like that weakens them as a team, which is why they're not, among the best. The last one for us to discuss, Charean, I think we both know they're not the greatest Cowboys team in franchise history, but still the 2007 squad. You were the one who put this on the list, not me. But of course, I mean, an incredible team, 13-3. I mentioned, this, the 94 team was the only one that lost the NFC Championship game. That's because this team didn't make it there. This is maybe the most infamous team in Cowboys history for like football reasons, certainly not off the field reasons, although there is the Cabo trip in this, mystique here. A point differential of 130. And you can tell me if you agree or disagree, but this really felt out of nowhere. I maintain, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but a few months before this season started, obviously, at the 2007 NFL draft, Brady Quinn fell to the Cowboys. And at the time, I mean, was regarded as this incredible prospect. And the fact like that, if that happened today, if the Cowboys passed on the would-be top prospect, obviously Jamarcus Russell was the top prospect, but a top prospect in the name of an undrafted free agent who had, in his 4th year played 10 games for them the year before, people would roast them for that. But they stuck with Tony Romo, gave him a new deal. They came out week 1 and lit up the Giants, an incredible game, and were so awesome. Really, didn't have, like, they had maybe one true loss, I would argue, obviously to New England. They lost, of course, to Philadelphia, the Jessica Simpson game, as everybody knows. But their final loss in Washington in the regular season finale was just kind of a, rest your starters type situation. Obviously, shortly after Sean Taylor had passed away. But a very, very infamous team. But not the best in Cowboys. But what are your thoughts on the 2007 Cowboys?
Well, I thought they were going to win it all or have a chance to win it all the way they had played during the regular season. This is a team that had 13 Pro Bowlers off of it, and they were second in points, third in yards, offensively, defensively, 13 in points, ninth in yards. I think they're, when you talk about the 2014 team, we talk about the dad's catch. Look, the Cowboys were not going to beat the Packers in 2014. Their defense was not good enough. They were 19th in total defense. They had no chance to win the Super Bowl, zero. This team had a chance because they were good enough on defense to get it done. And I think it was a huge disappointment to lose to the Giants the way they did, 21-17. And you still go back to Patrick Creighton's drop. If he had caught that pass, I think the Cowboys win that game. And judging by what the Giants did and going on and beating the Patriots in the Super Bowl, I think this was a team that would have had a chance to go on and at least be close to the Super Bowl, if not win the Super Bowl. And you talk about how things change. Would the Cowboys have won that Super Bowl if they had gotten there? Would we talk about the Patriots as being the undefeated team, the best team of all time because they beat the Cowboys in the Super Bowl? Who knows? But the Cowboys didn't finish strong, and I have a lot of problems when teams don't play their players that last week and then have a bye week, and now you're talking 3 weeks between meaningful games. This is a team that lost 3 of their last 4 games. They didn't handle the end of the season well. And whether that was coaching or whether that was team leadership, you talk about the Cabo trip, whatever it was, this team didn't handle the end of the season as they should have, which is why they lost at home in their first postseason game. I think it's a very good team. 13-3 says they were a very good team. 130-point differential says they were a very good team. They didn't get it done, and they didn't even get it done in one playoff game, much less, getting to the championship game and losing. They didn't even get there. Like they didn't even do anything in the postseason to get there. So, I still would probably talk about this team as being one of the best teams in team history, depending on how deep we're going to go. But I also would probably call it, along with the 94 team, the most disappointing team in team history. I would rank 94, I don't know if you say they're the most disappointing team in team history, but they didn't live up to the expectations that we had for them, right? It ended on a disappointing note where this team just didn't get it done like we all think they should have gotten done, being the best seed in the conference and not even getting to the championship game. I just think it was totally underachieving team for the talent they had on this team. And I think it's, why Wade Phillips is still around today. I mean, he could have been when Jerry hired him. He talked about him being his Tom Landry. He's going to be here forever, and he did the same thing with Jason Garrett. But we thought Wade would be around a really long time. That he had inherited a really good team, a really talented roster, a young quarterback, and all those things. And it didn't work out like that. Of course, Romo never won a Super Bowl. And, if they say they go on and even get to the Super Bowl in 2007, maybe we're talking about Tony Romo as a Hall of Famer. Look, Tony Romo's never going in the Hall of Fame.
Agreed.
But if they had gotten to the Super Bowl in 2007, I think you would at least have to consider it. If he had won the Super Bowl, I think we're truly talking about Tony Romo as a Hall of Fame player. But I just think not having that Super Bowl and not getting to the Super Bowl, not even getting to a championship game, just works against them. And that was the team. That was the chance they had to get there to the Super Bowl, if not win the Super Bowl.
I think that's all extremely well said. I think if they also win the Super Bowl, Tony Romo's story outranks Kurt Warner's just because he does it for the Dallas Cowboys. And that, that is a lot more glitz and glamour, especially at the time. Again, he's dating a well-known actress, and it's literally this personification of cliche, Hollywood dream, whatever. And if they had gone and beaten the Patriots of all teams, if they had been, Eli Manning is hoisted up for obviously that accomplishment twice over, but if that had the way Dallas Cowboys fans would people always accuse Dallas Cowboys fans of living in the past, but the way they would live in the past off of that would be unbelievable if they knocked off the 18-0 Patriots. And I think to your point, the reason I think we can kind of mentally square 1994 is there's an obvious, block. It's okay. Jimmy was gone. Barry was in. Like that was the clear dysfunction, whatever. But there is no obvious point of dysfunction. It's all this confusion because they did wither. I think maybe the peak of themselves before they started to kind of downhill was that Thursday night game against the Packers when Brett Favre was knocked out and Aaron Rodgers came in. They truly looked unstoppable at that point. And I mean, they were unstoppable on offense, on defense. They had a blocked field goal return for a touchdown against Minnesota. I mean, they were unreal in every facet. And the fact that I mean, Greg Ellis was on that team. Like, we forget that Greg Ellis was a part of that team. And rookie Nick Folk, I mean, they had an amazing Monday night win. That's how good they were, that they could kind of overcome shooting themselves in the foot in all these different ways. They won in truly every style. Are they the most infamous team, at least of the last quarter century?
Oh, yeah, no question about that. I think you truly say that. And I do have one point, maybe a what if, RJ, on that. I think you talk about the coach. What if Parcells had stayed around one more year? Would they have won it with Bill Parcells? Because he wouldn't have allowed the Cabo. Let's be honest. And we don't know how much the Cabo trip played into that loss. But certainly you think about it, but they would not have gone to Cabo if Bill Parcells was there. There's no way. So would that team have had a better chance to go to the Super Bowl, to go to the championship game, whatever it is, at least beat the Giants in the divisional round? Would they have had a better chance with Bill Parcells? I would argue that, yes, they would have had a better chance. I don't know if they would have gotten it done. They didn't get it done against Seattle the year before. So maybe they don't get it done. But I would have liked their chances with Bill Parcells at home field advantage. I would have liked the Cowboys' chances in that game, but of course it didn't work out that way. And Wade Phillips, was able to go 13-3 and then not get it done in the postseason. So that's just kind of the way it goes. But yeah, I would say it was the most infamous team in probably team history. Yeah, I would rank them up there at number one.
My last what if on this is I don't think I've ever even thought of this before. So I'm glad that you're the person that I'm bouncing it off of. And it's nowhere near as existential as the Bill Parcells one. But what if Terry Glenn is not hurt at the beginning of that season, and Patrick Crayton doesn't cement himself as this, would be, wide receiver 2 opposite of Terrell Owens? I mean, if a healthy Terry Glenn is more relied upon, does that playoff? But that playoff thing, I mean, I know you placed it on Patrick Crayton's hands in that moment. But that playoff, there were a lot of things wrong in that playoff game. But I mean, does that change anything if Terry Glenn is healthy for the entire season? I mean, obviously he came back for week 17, but do you trust Terry Glenn more, and may he rest in peace, in that hypothetical situation than you did Patrick Crayton?
Well, yeah, I think he was a more accomplished receiver, and then you would have had Patrick as your other guy, with Terry Glenn, and I just think it would have made your receiving core better. So certainly that's a question. A what if question, if we're throwing those out there. That's one of those what ifs. But you know what? Injuries are part of this game, and coaches quitting are a part of this game. But it didn't dawn on me until now about how, what if Jimmy had stayed? What if Parcells had stayed? Maybe the Cowboys have 2 more Super Bowl titles if they had gotten those Hall of Fame coaches to stay around even 1 more year. But it didn't happen like that. So we can what if all we want. It's not going to change time and the way things have played out. And, maybe this new coaching staff and this coach that already has a Super Bowl title now with the Cowboys can deliver them one, which hasn't been done since Barry Switzer in 95.
The last thing before I ask you our last question, if Bill Parcells stays, I wonder, does Jason Garrett join the Cowboys staff? If there are no vacancies on the staff, does he end up elsewhere? Does he have success? Obviously, he was courted by Baltimore and Atlanta following this season. Does he have that kind of success? Does he ever wind up on the Cowboys staff? Does he ever climb the ladder to become head coach? I mean, that's a really powerful what if in Cowboys history. Charean, to answer the question, although I think we have, who is the greatest Cowboys team of all time? It sounds like your mind is made up on 1992.
Yeah, I'm going with 92. It's close. And, again, you look at the different eras. But, I'm going with 92. I think that was the greatest team of all time.
Okay, that's well done. How many teams, just generally, would you say outrank them in NFL history? I mean, they're in the top 5. That feels like a safe floor for them.
Yeah, I think they're probably in the top 5, and that I would really have to look at it and study it to figure out exactly where they rank. But I think it's fair, just off the top of my head, to say they're probably in the top 5 of all-time teams. The fact that they were able to win 3 and 4 years, and you rank that as the best Cowboys team among those 4 teams, I think that puts them in that conversation and puts them firmly in that conversation of the greatest of all time. You know, you look at some of those 49ers teams and some of the Steelers teams, and of course the Packers, and you know, I think that's why they have so many Hall of Famers, right? Because they were able to win 5 championships in their history, and they'll have more Hall of Famers if they're able to add to that. But you know, championships are important when we start talking about Hall of Fame conversations. You've got to be really great. You know, DeMarcus Ware finally got his done, but I think even if he hadn't won the championship in Denver, I think that he would be going into the Hall of Fame. But you have to be really special to not win a championship to go into the Hall of Fame. So the Cowboys are going to have to win some championships to be able to have a bunch more Hall of Fame players.
Sure. I think that's well said. And obviously on the subject of greatest teams of all time across the NFL, the 2021 Cowboys will be in the mix very clearly and obviously. Well, we'll see if that ultimately pans out. But Charean Williams, so many people across the world are Dallas Cowboys fans and love the Cowboys because of all the work that you have done over the years. You truly are one of the keepers of the flame, one of the great people to ever be around the Cowboys in any capacity, and the NFL. And so there's no, like I said, person more fit to have this conversation with than you. So thank you so much for lending your expertise to us to talk about the greatest Cowboys team of all time.
Thanks for having me, RJ. I appreciate it.